Time for a massive conspiracy theory moment. Kind of. So, there's some debate about whether or not PCOS should be considered an intersex condition, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because it is a non-congenital condition, whereas with all the other intersex conditions, you either have it in your chromosomes like XXY, and then it manifests throughout, time. It becomes more obvious actually as you get older. Whereas the other ones, if you're born with ambiguous genitalia, then that's obviously something that you're born with. But PCOS is purely a hormonal condition that arises not through, they're not sure about this, but one of the, I don't know about leading, but I'm going to say leading theories, because it's certainly leading in my book, from things that I know, is that PCOS is strongly connected to childhood trauma, specifically emotional abuse. Hold on. So anyhow, yes, interestingly, I thought that it's not sexual abuse per se. I mean, obviously, any number of abuses can have an emotional abuse component, because abuse is not just physical. But what they have found is controlling for all of that. The thing that is consistent across PCOS appears to be emotional abuse in childhood. And so, I'm not sure what that exactly, what the mechanism there is. I've idly speculated that maybe something happens where the reproductive system is just like, this place is just not cool. We're not going to bring any more kids into the world, and so let's get these ovaries all cysted up or something. Not that PCOS prevents you necessarily from having kids, but I mean, any obstacle that the reproductive system could throw at that, if that were somehow the case, that there's like this is not a suitable, environment for having kids, because look at what we just went through. Could see that being a possibility. But of course, so the connection then, it's no big secret that borderline personality disorder, as well as, and certainly in the case of the dissociative spectrum disorders, as I would say they should be called, because we've got not just DID, dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, but not to be confused with a personality disorder. And then OSDD, other specified dissociative disorder, which is very specific. And then there's also like some other new one I read about today that I hadn't seen before, but it's a incomplete dissociative disorder or something like partial dissociative disorder. In any event, and I think that borderline personality disorder is actually better conceived of, from what I have seen of it, as a dissociative disorder. I mean, that's where the biggest problems come from, is what according to the structural dissociation theory, it would be called secondary structural dissociation. Primary is just like army PTSD, classic PTSD, a single event or a single adulthood, range of events, but of limited range, like, professional, you're in the military and you're seeing a bunch of shit. And that breaks off a portion of the mind that sort of is the classic Vietnam flashback kind of thing. And then secondary structural dissociation, according to the theory, is BPD, CPTSD, and OSDD. It treats them as basically equivalent, and they all these are all childhood, long-term childhood traumas that prevent the multiple apps, you might say, of the young human brain from coalescing into a single identity. And so it's not that, you have a regular identity that's been fragmented, is that the parts never really fuse together, because the anger and fear portions are kind of on like a hotline on a dedicated server. So because of the amount of trauma, it's just like, we're not going to incorporate these into the main persona. These are going to be like special emergency, hit one button and we're there in fear mode, in anger mode. And they are not really the same person then. To some extent, of course, they are, but to some extent they're not, and their memories can be completely jumbled up when they come back into their apparently normal part, as it's called in the theory, the main, 80-90% of life and of the personality. The perspective that was had by the fear and anger parts is almost incomprehensible, because the apparently normal part doesn't have fear and anger as part of it. As part of what makes borderlines very, very charming and fun to be around until something triggers them into those fear and anger parts, because you're dealing with a person who fundamentally does not have fear and anger as a component of their personality. In any event, so it has been well documented that both BPD and OSDD, DID, the dissociative disorders, are very common in young transitioners, and in the D-trans community especially, unsurprisingly, because the problem was never actually that they were trans. The problem is that they have a fragmented personality, and they have trauma. Oftentimes it is sexual trauma, and there's a sort of a defense mechanism of like, well, if the person who did whatever to me, whether I'm, male or female, it was my body and the way that it is that attracted this negative attention that hurt me. Therefore, if I get rid of that, if I change my body so that I'm not that thing that was attractive to that bad person, then I'll be fine. I'll never get, molested or worse again. That's obviously not a conscious thought, but it is a very understandable underlying sort of subconscious motive for transitioning, is just that sense of, I don't feel safe in this body. Let's see how I feel about being in another one. Anything would be better than this, because we all know what happened in this one. So now we've got the connection with of childhood trauma leading to BPD and OSDD, or let's just say dissociative disorders of some kind, and then also childhood emotional trauma leading to PCOS, a adult intersex condition in which, and I guess I didn't specify this, in which it's an excess of testosterone. It's women who start producing excess testosterone, and they get hirsutism, which is a beard, sort of mustache, whiskers, body hair, generally skin tags and discolored patches. Periods are absolute hell, which is great if you're borderline, because you're already an emotional like time bomb, and then you add in like super PMS or PMDD. That's makes for a great, 1 week out of every month where the person that you love is going to be treated like absolute shit, because you already don't have the ability to regulate your emotions, and now you've got this extra painful, extra hormonal, possibly, really, really long period. Sometimes you have no period for 3 months, and then you have it for like 2 weeks. It's all sorts of interesting varieties, but it does create sort of secondary traits of masculinity, just because of the excess testosterone running through your system. And so it's no surprise that, again, a lot of young women who decide to transition, they're already maybe having this PCOS effect. They're having excess testosterone in their system. They feel that they need that, and it is part of their makeup at this point. But it's all connected. I mean, all of these conditions, we saw this on Buck Angel the other day. He was talking about how all of the detransitioners he's talked to have borderline personality disorder, and they probably also, or have OSDD. It's not as often tested for, I suppose you'd say, but definitely is just, I think, as common. I mean, all the dissociative disorders are fundamentally they're PTSD taken to some extreme, to where it's such a strong PTSD that it fragments your mind, or prevents it from coalescing into a single mind in the first place. In any event, this is all just, rushing through my head. There are people I've seen, psychiatrists, have speculated that, transitioning or having, gender dysphoria to the extent that you would want to transition is in itself a face of borderline personality disorder. And there are plenty of articles, going back and forth on this issue. Some trying to say, no, it just emulates borderline personality disorder, where you become suicidal and paranoid, and you think that everybody's like against you because of your identity, but it really is because they're against you because you're trans. That all depends on how realistic it is to say that all of us normie cis people just hate trans people. I don't know if that's as common as is suggested. Again, the FBI's hate crime stats show that gay men get hate crimed more than the whole rest of the alphabet rainbow put together. All lesbians, all bi, all trans, all queer and intersex, even everybody. The most hate crimed are gay men.